Meccano, part number 17A, angle girder. From the 1950s. The second longest piece Meccano made. Hi folks, and welcome back. I haven't been regularly script writing for over a month as my mother's health has deteriorated. And as always, she comes first right now. After all, she supported us in childhood, so I feel it's right to support her in her hour of need. So it's a bit strange to sit back down and start writing again. But time is one of those strange things. It feels like only yesterday when I was trying to finish the script for episode 12 at the beginning of 2022, so I could get the channel started. And here I am, writing for this episode, some nearly 60 scripts later. And it's nearly the middle of November and my thoughts are turning to Christmas. But by the time you're listening to this, Christmas will have come and gone. And that's the thing about time. While it's linear, measured and seemingly fixed, it's also elastic and flows like a great river, sometimes slow and methodical, sometimes fast as it races over rapids. And we have to enjoy the moment we are in, for it will soon be behind us, and while our lives might well be the worse instead of better, they will be different. The Meccano models I'm building come from a time that seems to have disappeared, as both these models come from a bygone era, as well as dating back to the late 1960s. But yet their hold on history is not as distant as we think. To my mother, the dockyard cranes are the sights of her childhood, with a stagecoach not being too distant in her past. But to me, both are long lost to a history that I never saw, but yet did read about. Both builds have links to logistics, a side of industry and life that has always fascinated me, the art of getting what you need at just the right moment in time, and try to deal with the bottlenecks that appear, and that comes back to time management again. And as I write this, my mother is recovering from a mini-stroke and spending 2 weeks in a nursing home to fully recover from that and a fall in hospital. Or I will freely admit that the rest from the day-to-day stresses of full-time caring that I do as my job is lovely. It also raises a worrying red flag for the future. For there comes a time when we can no longer provide the care that she needs, and then that job passes over to a nursing home. And a future beckons that I have no idea of, an unplanned, long-feared moment, when while both being free from the stresses and worrying of daily concerns of care, leaves me for the first time in quarter of a century of not having to care for another person in some form or other. And I'll be honest when I say that I look at this future with some fear. Like a caged animal, I will be free to do what I want. But then it's so long ago when I had that freedom that I no longer know what to do. And this future will all too soon be a past. And I have to have faith that it will work itself out. I also have to deal with what has happened, because if I'm not careful, the past will become the cage that imprisons my future. Or to put it more simply, I have to learn to let go. But what are these builds? Both of which were built in the heat of August, and being written about on a cold, damp, rainy day in mid-November, when summer seems a distant memory, and also so far away at the same time. It's quite nice to build a crane again, after so many things that are not cranes. But the stagecoach is quite different, and we'll probably get much more of this script. I don't think there's another stagecoach build in the manuals. In Britain and Europe as a whole, the stagecoach, in a form that we would recognise, dates back to the 16th centuries, and was meant as transportation for women and the infirm. if you were an able-bodied man, you were meant to ride or walk. The coaches had no suspension and the journey was far from comfortable, and slow, being almost impossible in spring and late autumn due to mud-bound roads. The term stagecoach comes from the way the coaches operated. They would travel between coaching inns, a distance of between 10 to 15 miles, where the travellers would stop, have a meal if needed, and rest overnight. The following morning, fresh horses would take them on the next section of road. A going of 20 miles in one day was considered to be good. These sections of travel were called stages. In 1673, it took 8 days to travel the 170 miles from London to Exeter in summer conditions, a journey that can now be done in 3 hours by car in winter. The first stagecoach route was from Edinburgh to Leith in Scotland and started operating in 1610. By the middle of the 18th century, a Manchester-based company created a new service called the Flying Coach, a 200-mile route that took just 4.5 days, barring accidents. This high rate of speed was down to a new suspension being fitted, that of leaf springs, which for those of you wanting to know your history is a French invention, a nation which is at the heart of transportation, a debt that they get very little recognition for. Coinciding with these faster coaches were the two legendary Scottish engineers who built the road network that covered Britain and even made its mark in America, Thomas Telford and John McAdam. Building on the work carried out by the French engineer Pierre-Marie Jérôme Trasange. It was a time of enlightenment when science and engineering ruled. Without the work of these three engineers, the advancements of the next 200 years would have been hampered or even stopped. I have a passion that I don't talk about much, and that's stamp collecting. These tiny squares of paper are time travellers in many ways. They have witnessed history, been part of the world, and have sent news to people. And in the late 1700s, the Royal Mail Coach was designed for the General Post Office. The standard design allowed for repairs to be carried out to a set standard, and the coaches were operated by independent companies. The Royal Mail Coach held a royal charter, right of free travel on any of the new toll roads that were being built across Britain. It ran to a very exact and demanding timetable. If the gates were not opened by the time the coach arrived, the gate operator would be fined. The coach was never designed for the comfort of the passengers, and apart from the quick changes of horses at regular stops called posts, and the collection or dropping off of mail, at times even this was done by throwing the mail as it passed the post and snatching the outgoing bag as they left. The main aim was to get the mail delivered fast. The person in charge of the post was called the master, and these posts were every 10 to 15 miles. In time, the postmaster would have an office inside the coaching inn where the horses were changed, and our village post office and postmaster was invented and added to our lexicon as new words. By 1830, the first of the railways were starting to compete with the mail coaches. It was a competition that the coaches could not win. By the 1850s, the mail coach had ceased to exist in Britain. The stagecoach still held on in some places until the invention of the internal combustion engine finished its reign in the 20th century. In fact, locally, the Braes of Derwentsside coach ran until the 1950s, be it by that time only for pleasure as a novel day's outing. But for a long time it served the villages of Snod's Edge, Edwinbyres and Blanchland as the only regular connection to the towns of Consett to the south and Hexham to the north. I suppose I'd better write something about this crane. This is a really fun build, as well as being a bit basic. It is also the model of the front cover of the Set 0 and Set 1 manual that was built earlier. And I made a mistake when I attached the 20A pulley wheel to the base of the cab. By the looks of it, it is a little bit too far forward, allowing the cab to tilt forward due to the forces imparted on it via the jib. Of course, this wasn't noticed until I'd finished building it and filming it. Now, as I've always said before, I will always show my mistakes, as it gives me a chance to learn from it. In this case, just follow the instructions, idiot. But for all that being said, it's a very playable toy with both dinky toy cars and Hornby railways, as there's little more satisfying than unloading a cargo from one thing and transferring it over to another. And at the end of the day, Meccano was about play as well as education. And I think these two models sum that up well. The crane is a toy, something to enjoy and play with after building, while the stagecoach is there to spark the mind and ask the question why, and then go off and read and explore history. And that was done through the medium of printed word in books you sat and read. These days, all too often, I turn to the internet. With a split screen, I can have multiple books open at one time. I still have desk space to be able to see the screen without having built a wall of immovable objects. Mind you, spilling my mug of tea over a keyboard has been moving a lot faster than when I spill it over a book. But both mediums mark the passage of time, and there are moments when sitting with a book that was printed over 100 years ago is a nice link to the people who first held it. The ones who were the first to look at the pages and enjoy the knowledge held within.